The champagne flute trembled in her hand, though not a drop spilled. Laughter erupted across the gilded ballroom, sharp and merciless, all aimed at her. The queen bee, adorned in jewels that caught every light, had just delivered her cruelest performance yet, mocking her in front of hundreds. Eyes turned, whispers spread, and she stood still, offering only the faintest smile. To the crowd, it looked like defeat. To her, it was ignition. The silence she held behind that smile was not submission. It was calculation, colder and sharper than glass. The sting of betrayal burned deeper than the insult. What twisted the knife wasn't the queen bee's words alone, but the chorus of false friends who laughed with her, people she had trusted, defended, even considered allies, now revealed themselves as nothing more than shadows basking in borrowed light. In that moment, she understood she had never been part of their circle. She was merely a prop, a pawn they dressed up and ridiculed for sport. The humiliation was exquisite fuel, and the fire it kindled in her chest was steady, patient, unrelenting. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, where justice isn't just imagined, but designed. Then came the detail that sealed it, the dress. The queen bee twirled proudly, flaunting a custom designer gown as though it were a crown itself. Every thread shimmered with arrogance. But what the crowd didn't know, what the queen herself didn't know, was that the creation she flaunted came from the very mind she had ridiculed. The insult wasn't just cruel, it was ironic. She had mocked the architect of her own splendor, biting the very hand that clothed her vanity. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She smiled, even as her pulse slowed into icy focus. Behind that serene face, calculations unfolded. Every weakness, every insecurity, every dependency the queen bee carried, she mapped them with precision. Where others saw a cruel joke at her expense, she saw an opportunity ripening, a moment that would later glitter in memory as the beginning of the end. The crowd sipped champagne and smirked at her silence, never realizing it wasn't silence at all. It was strategy. Her secret had always been her shield. No one knew that the empire of silk, sequins, and shimmering fabric belonged to her. She had guarded her identity like a shadow, content to let others chase the spotlight while she held the strings. But now the game had changed. Her greatest weapon wasn't wealth, or fame, or even design. It was anonymity. She could stand in the very room where her work reigned supreme, invisible and underestimated, while her enemy strutted blind into her own downfall. Arrogance began showing its cracks. The queen bee's hunger for applause turned desperate, her laughter louder, her gestures wider, her dependence on borrowed beauty more obvious. The protagonist watched, a quiet observer in the wings, as the crown of admiration slipped with every exaggerated performance. The queen was too busy seeking attention to notice the noose tightening, thread by thread. Every insult the protagonist endured became part of the blueprint. She collected them, not as wounds, but as stitches, weaving a tapestry of revenge. She designed her plan as she designed her gowns, with patience, precision, and the knowledge that the smallest detail could make or break the entire creation. Shame had become her greatest resource, and with it she sewed a strategy no one would see until it was too late. The fatal mistake came when the queen bee overstepped. Blinded by her own vanity, she demanded a dress no designer dared to promise. Extravagant, impossible, a garment that could break reputations if it failed. And in that arrogance, she placed her fate directly into the protagonist's hands. The order was signed, the deadline set, and with it, the final act began to write itself. The night of the unveiling arrived. Cameras flashed, music swelled, and the queen bee prepared to bask in admiration once again. But when the spotlight turned, the truth unraveled with the precision of a seam being cut. The dress she claimed as her triumph was traced back to its true creator. Papers, proof and witnesses revealed the hidden identity she had mocked, and suddenly the laughter shifted. The curtain had been pulled back, and the audience no longer cheered for their queen. They marveled instead at the woman she had tried to bury. Humiliation returned, but not for the protagonist. The crowd that once joined in cruel laughter now turned it on the queen bee. She stood in the same cruel spotlight she had built for others, only this time it burned her. The whispers that once bolstered her status twisted into ridicule. The throne she had crafted from mockery crumbled beneath her heels, and through it all, the protagonist never raised her voice. Her revenge was not loud or frantic, it was elegant. A single reveal had undone years of arrogance. In her silence, in her grace, she proved that power was not taken by force, but reclaimed with precision. The queen bee's ruin was total, and yet no rage had touched it. It was revenge served cold, sharpened by patience, wrapped in elegance. When the dust settled, the world no longer looked to the queen bee for leadership, admiration, or style. They looked to the woman she had tried to humiliate. Power had been redefined, not as the loudest voice in the room, but as the calmest presence in the storm. She had risen not just vindicated, but unstoppable. And as she stepped into her rightful light, she knew one truth would echo long after the night ended. Success was the sweetest revenge, and her silence had always been the deadliest weapon. The music swelled and chandeliers glittered overhead, but the sound that pierced most sharply was laughter, not the light-hearted kind that drifts across a party, but the cruel, targeted laughter that tightens like a rope around the throat. She stood in the center of the ballroom, her dress whispered about, pointed at, mocked with biting remarks disguised as jokes. The queen of the evening raised her glass, smirking as though she had orchestrated a grand performance. And the protagonist was the unfortunate act. Eyes turned, camera flashes followed, and the chaotic humiliation spread like spilled wine across silk. She did not flinch. She held her posture, her silence cutting sharper than any words. Yet beneath the noise, old wounds stirred. That voice, laced with venom, carried the same tone it always had. The same that had haunted her school days, her early steps into society, her every vulnerable moment that the socialite seemed born to exploit. This was not chance, nor a drunken misstep. This was deliberate cruelty, sharpened by history. Every mocking syllable reminded her that her enemy's brand of malice was never careless. It was calculated, designed to wound with precision and to leave scars that lingered. And still, she wore her mask. She let them believe she was nothing more than a shaken guest at their party. The invitation she had once thought an honor now revealed its truth. It had never been kindness, never inclusion. She was not welcomed. She was baited. The crowd had not gathered simply to dance or to drink. They had gathered to feast on her embarrassment, orchestrated by the queen who thrived on others' pain. Behind every false smile, every glass raised, in shallow camaraderie, teeth waited to tear her apart. Then came the flicker of phones, the mechanical hunger of lenses. Whispers turned into captions, captions into hashtags, hashtags into digital wildfire. Her humiliation leapt from the gilded ballroom to the glowing screens of strangers across the city. Each click, each share, each cruel comment twisted the knife. The sting was no longer confined to four walls. It had been immortalized, archived in the endless gallery of internet gossip. And as the queen basked in the applause of cruelty, the protagonist felt something far colder settle inside. The queen's weakness revealed itself in the midst of her triumph. She paraded her exclusive designer gown with smug delight, certain it cemented her dominance. She called attention to the label, to the supposed rarity, to the cost that only she could afford. She believed the fabric itself crowned her, blind to the bitter irony. For in her pride, she flaunted not her own victory, but the very handiwork of the woman she ridiculed. Her arrogance was a spotlight, one that illuminated a truth she could not see. The protagonist absorbed it all with a stillness that unsettled even those who expected tears. Pain pressed hard against her ribs, but she refused to give it audience. Instead, she stored it carefully, as if filing it away for later use. Her silence was no longer born of fear. It was armor. Every insult, every whisper, every flash of... The camera was a brick, and with it she built the foundation of her resolve. Calm on the outside, sharpened within, she let them believe she was powerless. But power was already hers. What they didn't know, what no one at that glittering gathering knew, was that the empire these people adored had been woven by her hand. The designs they worshipped, the labels they craved, the very dress paraded by her tormentor all bore her hidden touch. She was the ghost in their wardrobes, the unseen architect of their vanity. To mock her for her gown was to mock the source of every garment they sought to possess. Her greatest strength had always been her invisibility, and now it would become her most devastating weapon. As the music softened and the last glasses of champagne were drained, the crowd drifted into the night, sated with cruelty. But she did not leave hollow or broken. She left with a vow etched into her mind, clear and unwavering. This night would not be remembered for her humiliation. It would be remembered as the beginning of a war only one of them was prepared to fight. And when the final act came, it would not be her laughter echoing through the ballroom. It would be theirs. She did not answer the laughter with anger, nor the mockery with tears. When the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, she slipped into silence like armor, retreating not into weakness but into thought. Every insult became a thread she rewound carefully, examining not the sting, but the opportunity within it. Rage could be wasted in a moment, but strategy could remake entire empires. And she had one already, hidden in the shadows, stitched with her hands alone. It was almost ironic. The very dresses that crowned her enemy queen, that drew eyes and applause wherever she went, were hers in secret. Each hem, each stitch, each line of design whispered her authorship, though no one in the glittering rooms knew. She had built quietly, sold her brilliance through names that shielded her anonymity, letting her craft shine while her face remained unseen. Now she saw clearly. Every gown the socialite paraded was not a triumph of arrogance, but a thread leading back to her. Her mind wandered to nights of fire and determination, to the years when laughter had been sharper than hunger. She remembered the taunts, the cruel words, the dismissals that told her she would never matter. Those moments had forged her choice to disappear from the spotlight, to protect her art with secrecy rather than expose herself to ridicule again. In her retreat, she had risen higher than any of them could imagine, her genius powering brands they worshipped. The anonymity that once seemed exile had become her fortress. Yet the voice of the past still echoed, the old refrain of contempt. "You'll never belong in fashion." It rang louder in her mind now, repeated by the same lips that mocked her dress at the party. But where once those words had pierced, now they sharpened her resolve. She would not answer them with denial. She would answer them with revelation. The words that sought to define her would become the blade she wielded. Patience guided her next steps. She gathered quietly, storing every fragment of arrogance her rival offered so freely. Screenshots of posts dripping with vanity. Overheard. Boasts in crowded rooms. Whispers that slithered from false friends' lips. She collected them all. Each piece was a weapon, small alone but devastating together. She built her arsenal silently, careful not to rouse suspicion, while her enemy continued to strut unaware. And strut she did. The socialite flaunted her outfits across platforms, tagging brands, praising exclusivity, basking in shallow admiration. Every post was a performance of wealth and power. But to the one watching in silence, it was not glamour she saw. It was borrowed glory. Each gown was another mark of dependency, another reminder that the queen bee's reign stood on foundations not her own. She studied more than the woman's arrogance. She studied the machine that fed it. The supply chains, the contracts, the archives of sketches, all were strands of a web she herself had spun. With each discovery, she tightened her hold, unseen, yet absolute. Recognition was never her aim. Control without a name was far more potent. Invisibility was her greatest disguise, and from it, her dominance grew. But she did not rush. Quick revenge would have been petty. Precision mattered. Every detail of her plan had to be crafted as carefully as the gowns she designed. She resisted the temptation to strike early, choosing instead to wait for the grandest stage, a moment when exposure would not only wound, but annihilate. In the meantime, whispers spread in her favor. She began speaking to designers, clients, investors, the very voices the socialite relied upon for validation. Each conversation was a stitch in a larger tapestry, a plan woven in shadows but designed for brilliance. Allies formed not with loud declarations but with quiet agreements, waiting for the right time to step into the light. And that moment approached. The gala, the pinnacle of the fashion world, loomed on the horizon. A stage where reputations were crowned or destroyed in a single night. The queen bee prepared for it with careless pride, blind to the trap awaiting her. Every step she took toward that event only drew her closer to the edge of her ruin. Subtle orders were placed in her name, threads of sabotage woven so invisibly she never noticed the pull. Deliveries, contracts, and favors tied her unwittingly to a scheme she believed. She orchestrated herself. What she carried into the spotlight would not be triumph. It would be the seeds of her downfall, sown by her own hand, though guided by another's. And when she finally stood before the mirror, rehearsing her smile, adjusting the gown she thought declared her untouchable, the reflection was not her own. The protagonist saw herself in those seams, her craft, her power, her shadow stitched into every detail. The queen believed she wore her armor of status, but in truth, she wore chains. And the one who forged them was waiting for the moment to tighten them until they shattered. The video spread like wildfire, sharpened by the laughter of those who shared it. The socialite, draped in satin and venom, looked straight into the camera as she called her rival pathetic, her words dripping with disdain. She smirked as if she had won something permanent, not realizing that with every share, every view, she was sowing the seeds of her own ruin. The world saw cruelty dressed as entertainment, but the one she mocked saw only an opportunity, a stage being built for her without lifting a finger. Irony clung to the insult like perfume. While she ridiculed plain designs, the very gown she wore, paraded as proof of her superiority, was born from the hands she belittled. Every seam was a signature, invisible to the crowd yet undeniable to its creator. She strutted in the work of the woman she mocked, blind to the truth stitched into her own armor. The insult and the irony were no longer separate. They were bound, ready to be unveiled when the moment was right. But revenge did not come in an outburst. The protagonist did not leap into defense or rage. Instead, she embraced silence, letting the cruelty echo, feeding on itself while she sharpened her scheme. Silence became her weapon. Every day the insult lived unchecked, the more complacent her enemy grew. And in that stillness, plans were spun tighter, more intricate, until the mocker's laughter was no longer an attack, but a countdown. Hints began to surface like whispers at the edge of a storm. Through the careful words of her proxy, the creative director, talk of a founder's grand reveal began circulating. Nothing concrete, nothing rushed, just enough to tease the world's curiosity. The rumor became a spark, and the fashion world, hungry for mystery, clung to it. A hidden genius. Behind the house, a silent architect stepping into the light. Speculation spread like wildfire, with every outlet hungry to be the first to confirm what no one yet understood. Soon magazines and blogs latched on, fanning the flames until social media buzzed with questions. Who had built the empire? Who had defined the elegance everyone craved? Photographs were dissected, theories were spun, and the anticipation for the gala grew unbearable. The story became larger than the dresses themselves. It became about the ghost behind the brand, the brilliance hidden in shadow. The silence that once mocked her was now the loudest noise in the industry. Meanwhile, the socialite basked in the glow of her imagined place in it all. She claimed the spotlight in advance, boasting of her front row seat at the gala as though she had earned it. She bragged about her influence, convinced she was untouchable, blind to the truth that she was merely being positioned for the fall. Every boast, every arrogant declaration only fed the trap she walked into willingly. The stage was nearly set, polished with precision. The gala, the heart of the fashion world's calendar, would not just be an event. It would be the perfect ambush. Every step the socialite took toward that night only secured her destruction. The lights, the cameras, the eyes of the world. She believed they would affirm her reign, not realizing they were prepared to expose her as a fraud. And still, she mocked. Each sneer, each casual dismissal, each arrogant laugh added another knot in the rope tightening around her. Without knowing it, she built her own downfall, word by word, post by post. The protagonist did not have to twist the blade. Her enemy did it herself. All that remained was the unveiling, and when it came, the cruelty that had once filled the room would return to its source, heavier and sharper than ever before. The gala shimmered with extravagance, its hallways lined with glittering masks of wealth and fame. Cameras clicked, champagne glasses clinked, and all eyes turned as the socialite arrived draped in yet another gown from the house she flaunted as her own. She floated forward, confident that she was the crown jewel of the night, never once suspecting that the very fabric wrapping her frame carried the fingerprints of the woman she scorned. She thrived under the spotlight, feeding on its warmth as if the entire night had been orchestrated in her honor. Flashes painted her in brilliance, her smile rehearsed to perfection, her laughter practiced to pierce. She preened for photographers, adjusted her gown for effect, and carried herself with the smug assurance of someone convinced the world belonged to her. Pride radiated from her like perfume, thick and suffocating, luring admiration but sealing her fate. Yet beneath the glitter, tension coiled. Whispers drifted through the crowd, quiet at first, then louder, like sparks on dry wood. The creative director, with careful timing, hinted at the arrival of the house's elusive founder, the mind behind the designs that had captivated the industry. Excitement rippled instantly. Guests leaned closer, journalists scribbled notes, and curiosity grew like wildfire. Who was this unseen genius? Why had they remained hidden? And why tonight? The anticipation turned the air electric, shifting the focus away from the woman who thought it was hers alone. Then the call came. A hush swept across the hall as the announcer's voice echoed, inviting the founder to step forward. The audience leaned in, breaths caught, unaware they were seconds from witnessing a storm years in the making. The spotlight that once worshipped false pride now searched for truth, waiting for the silhouette that would emerge. The entrance was not grand, not gilded in theatrics. She walked with quiet grace, clad in her own plain design, the very style mocked as unworthy. Yet the elegance of her presence silenced the room more effectively than any jeweled gown ever could. Every step was steady, unhurried, carrying a weight that needed no embellishment. She did not demand attention. She commanded it by simply existing. Shock rolled through the audience like a wave. Gasps broke out. Camera flashes burst in frantic rhythm, and faces paled as recognition struck. The woman they had seen mocked in viral clips, dismissed as a nobody, now stood revealed as the architect of everything they adored. Power shifted in an instant, not through words, but through undeniable truth, and the room could no longer look away. The irony struck hardest at the center of it all. The socialite, wrapped tightly in the very designs she had ridiculed, had become a living exhibit of her own hypocrisy. Every seam of her gown betrayed her arrogance. Every jewel-studded pose exposed her as nothing more than a borrowed throne. She had mocked the hand that built her, and now that hand had pulled away the illusion. Journalists pounced like wolves. Questions flew, pens scratched furiously, and camera lenses captured every flicker of expression. The timeline was clear. Her boasts, her jeers, her viral cruelty, all laid bare under the revelation. Each insult became evidence, each laugh another nail hammered into the coffin of her reputation. The world began connecting dots with merciless clarity, and the crown she believed unshakable cracked under the weight of truth. The most devastating strike came not in fury, but in restraint. The founder did not speak a word to her rival. She offered no sharp retort, no triumphant gloating. Her silence was sharper than any blade, her composure more humiliating than ridicule. Standing tall, she embodied a truth so absolute that it required no defense. The crowd's gaze told the story for her, stripping away every ounce of the socialite's false power. The laughter that once filled the air vanished, replaced by a silence heavy with respect, awe, and shifting loyalty. Where once mockery echoed, now reverence grew. The socialite shrank into the shadows, abandoned by the same eyes that had once applauded her. And in that silence, the crowd crowned a new queen, not with tiaras or titles, but with recognition that could not be stolen. The night belonged to the woman who had once been dismissed, who had endured cruelty with quiet strength and turned it into a masterpiece of revenge. Success was her answer, power her poetry, silence her justice. And when she left the stage, it was clear she had not simply won. She had redefined the game, leaving behind a single truth that echoed louder than laughter ever had. Real power does not need to shout. The morning after the gala, the world had already turned. Screens lit up with headlines dripping with irony, splashed across every platform from glossy fashion blogs to ruthless tabloids. The socialite, who only hours before reveled in applause, now stood ridiculed as the woman who mocked the very designer she had unknowingly worshipped. Side-by-side images went viral, her smug words replayed beside the revelation of the true founder, her arrogance dissected with glee. What she once believed was her weapon, her sharp tongue, had become her public noose, tightened by every replay, every meme, every caption mocking her downfall. Her pedestal crumbled faster than she could grasp. Sponsors, once eager to attach, their names to hers, quietly severed ties. Contracts dissolved under the weight of scandal, and invitations that once arrived gilded and insistent stopped altogether. One by one, doors closed, and the spotlight she clung to turned cold. In its place came silence from the powerful circles she had counted on to shield her. Without their validation, her empire collapsed, exposing her influence for what it truly was: fragile, borrowed, and built on another's brilliance. Meanwhile, the brand she ridiculed soared higher than ever. The revelation of its true founder sparked a renaissance in fashion. Her vision rebranded overnight as a symbol of authenticity and strength. What was once dismissed as plain became the new language of elegance, replicated by imitators who could never quite capture the quiet intelligence of her designs. She gave no speeches, no interviews seeking to drag her rival further down. She did not need to. The world did the work for her, raising her to heights her enemy could only dream of, while dismantling the false empire built on cruelty. Her triumph was striking not because she gloated, but because she refused to. When questioned about the scandal, she simply smiled, her silence cutting sharper than words. She let her work, her gowns, her vision, her craft, speak with a power that no insult could rival. The grace with which she carried her victory became part of her legend, proving that true dominance requires no pettiness. For the socialite, irony became her mirror. Once the self-proclaimed queen of fashion, she now filled headlines as a walking punchline. Satirists mocked her, journalists dismantled her past boasts, and her name became shorthand for hubris. She could not escape the sting of poetic justice. The woman who had laughed loudest now became the entertainment, ridiculed by the very world she thought she controlled. And through it all, the truth stood unshakable. Power did not lie in cruelty, nor in empty crowns, but in resilience, vision, and quiet strength. The founder had risen from shadow to sovereignty without ever lowering herself to bitterness. In doing so, she claimed not just victory, but permanence. The crown, once a hollow prop in the hands of another, now rested firmly on her head, earned, unchallenged, and undeniable. In the end, the final lesson was etched into memory. Truth does not need to shout. It wears the crown in silence, and it never falls.